probably so many of our listeners also have at least one part of our identities that we may have feel judged by or may have feel marginalized in society by. And like we all deserve to be able to bring our whole selves with our whole bodies to our doctors and to our healthcare spaces.
Hello, everyone. I am very excited because we have a different type of show today. We have Arielle Egozi on, and I just want to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself and for our audience who may not be familiar.
Very grateful and so happy to be here. I'm like, I always never know where to begin, but okay, we have my name covered. I use she and they pronouns, currently based in Mexico City right now, which has been a dream. And, you know, for the purposes of this podcast and for, I feel like the internet at large, I went very viral on LinkedIn for posting sex work to my LinkedIn work experiences. But that's like the tiniest sliver of my life experience, of my work experience. It just happened to like blow up by accident. But I'm an author working on a book that will be out September 2024, and a creative director and branding strategist that works with all sorts of different brands and different clients, and both agency side and brand side, to help sort of bring more connection to audiences, which I feel like actually will be very transferable to a lot of the conversation we'll be having here in terms of healthcare and, you know, the doctor-patient relationship and all of that. But yeah, any more questions? I'm here, so ask away.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned, of course, we'll talk about the LinkedIn and all of that kind of stuff, which is very important for our listeners because a lot of times, I know I've mentioned before, LinkedIn is powerful and LinkedIn is gold. I know sometimes in this time when you're trying to get into school and when you're trying to get into residency, your life may not necessarily be your own because they have the application process, and it's kind of like the draft in a point where like you have the match process and they kind of have to choose you and you choose them. So when you get a little further out, it does become your own. And LinkedIn is magical for making connections, for talking to people, for networking, and for branding. So I'm so glad that we have you on here because even if you aren't able to get a job utilizing LinkedIn, you can kind of create your brand or even innovate in different ways where you don't have to wait and stay inside of one box as a person who's working in healthcare.
100%. And I've had so many close friends go through, you know, medical school and residency and fellowship, and now they're like about to surface on the other side. And it's just been, it is such a different experience than the one I've had in my career. But I feel like there's something so beautiful to be able to exchange and learn from each other, from sort of having this like very, like you just said, where your life kind of isn't your own. But there's also something so beautiful about that, of having like this path that you know where you're going, versus I feel like I've had to so much figure it out and explore and sort of have to carve out. And the exchanges with, you know, the doctor friends of mine, of like the pieces of advice that I can give them versus what they can offer me. And so even something as simple as like breaking out a little bit of sort of like the med school bubble, I think can be really helpful to like bring perspective to sort of everything that, you know, all the listeners here are doing and the sacrifices they're making. Yeah. So it's beautiful work.
Absolutely. Because like you mentioned, we think we kind of have our life mapped out. That's the problem. Like there are so many things in both worlds that are transferable. And even if you have that linear path going from med school to residency to being an attending, there's still little bumps that can come in the road, and there's still a journey to medicine. So it's good to have these different skill sets and things to kind of help you do this thing called life.
So much.
So, as we mentioned, you made a lot of headlines when you listed sex worker on your professional LinkedIn. Individuals were broadcasting their personal morality beliefs and all of those kind of things on your experience. Have you experienced that in the healthcare setting before? And if yes, how so?
Oh my God, so much. And nothing even to do with like sex work, just being like a femme person with a vagina. I mean, I think back to the first time I ever went to the gynecologist, and it was a female gynecologist, and I was so nervous, of course, you know, I must have been, 16. And I remember having this whole exchange where the doctor kept asking me if I had had sex before. And I kept saying no, which was the truth. And she kept asking, like, your mother's not here. Like, you need to answer. And I was like, I have not had sex before. And she's like, I'm going to find out in a moment. So like, you better tell me, you know, whatever. And I was like, I literally had the shirt. Yes, check. And then finally, you know, she kind of looked at me and she was like, wow, good for you. Yeah. And so, your jaw just dropped. Mine did too. I felt so ashamed. I felt so small. My body at the time had been, you know, I think by that time, like I'd gone through puberty and like my breasts were big and I had this like very whatever specific shape that I feel like she was already inferring that, you know, was like adjacent to being sexually active and sexually promiscuous. And like when that wasn't the truth at all. And weirdly enough, accidentally, so I was like, I'm never going back to her. And then I have a much younger sister who's like 8.5 years younger than me. And so this must have been like a decade later. And she had a, what was it? Like a cyst burst, which was like super painful. My sister was freaking out. And so we asked, I don't know, someone we knew, like, okay, I think I hadn't been living in my hometown at the time. And I was home visiting and I was like, I'll take you to the doctor. We asked someone for a recommendation for this gynecologist. Lo and behold, it was the same one. And here she was again, like slut shaming my sister. And I was like, she's in so much pain. Oh, it was just terrible. And I mean, all of that to say is just, I think the reality is the healthcare space is like so unique in that we are coming, like patients are coming so vulnerably and so open, I guess would be the word, to, you know, to professional opinions and to sort of like literally, you know, our naked bodies and like everything that our bodies have been through are coming forward. And then to have doctors who are, you know, in those moments in positions of power, sort of projecting and inserting their own biased beliefs on your body can be so traumatic and so painful and so confusing. And I think, you know, I'm sure you know this more than anyone, but like the mortality rate of Black women and like in motherhood and all that stuff, it's like so much of science and research has been focused and geared towards white men. And so if white cis men, and so if you don't have that body, like I know literally like my friends in med school, like don't like ask me about the tools of like, you know, how to make a trans person feel safe in a room or like identity and all of this stuff. And it just feels so lacking when it's like, you're not just treating an interesting case, right? Or like just a body without a human or without an individual in it. It's a human with a body with a full experience that knows their body much better than a doctor who sees them once ever will. And so often I feel like the individual voice is not taken for truth, not taken for granted. And then we have, you know, all these biases and mortality rates and like all this stuff that's so terrible. So like, yes, times a million, it's happened to me in a variety of different ways, but I specifically remember that one. And it just really, it just felt like a grown up getting me in trouble just because I had a body that I was in. And that really sucked.
Yes. So I couldn't agree more. And I am very disheartened by your story, but I can't say that I'm surprised.
Yeah.
I will say that for the students who are listening, who are going through training, yes, we have workflows and guidelines and all these things that we are supposed to kind of go through the chalk boxes to care for patients, but we have to put at the forefront, like, we're building trust with our patient, so you should believe them. I know there are some surprise cases I myself have fallen for where the patients are like, no, I've never had sex, and then the pregnancy test comes back positive. But if someone is saying, like, I am saying I do not believe them, like, why not? Like, why would they feel comfortable telling you something if you're talking down to them or kind of like medically gaslighting them? That's crazy. And then in the terms of just feeling safe and feeling, like you said, that Black women are more likely to die in childbirth, 3.4 times more likely than white women. There has not been any research, like as much research as with white men for any women. Like, we weren't even allowed to be in medical trials until the 90s. And imagine all of the research that's happened since then. Like, we just had like our 30-something like anniversary. Like, that is crazy to me. Like, women weren't even allowed to be in clinical trials until then. Like, what do they think? Like, birth control came out in the 50s. Who are they testing it on? So, like, these things are crazy. And then, like, having the safe spaces for people who are trans is instrumental. It is necessary. Personally, I used to work at a community health center geared towards LGBTQ plus people, and there were countless individuals who just, one, didn't have access. There was one man who would fly to me every 3 months just to get his medications because we would not see him in South Carolina. Like, there is no reason you should be getting on a flight to fly to get your testosterone. Like, really? And then there was another man who was in their 50s, and he was trans, and he, you know how you have those different screening tests where you need to get certain things like your mammogram, you need to get like colonoscopy, all of those things. And he was getting to that age where he needed a colonoscopy, and he had never had one, and he was in his 50s. So I was having a conversation with him and his wife, and I was like, it's really important. Like, of course it's your choice, but I just want to put it out there because I don't want us to miss anything. Like, because of these things, I could find someone who is trans friendly, because he was very nervous about going to get the colonoscopy. And he said, I would rather die than have a colonoscopy because people are always focusing on my private parts as opposed to what they're supposed to do. If I go to see a heart doctor, why should I be asking to take my underwear down? And I think that it's crazy. Like, we are putting people's lives at risk just because people are living in their truth and being who they are. I know that I'm going on a rant, but it's just it's crazy how people can try to affect other people's lives just because they don't fit into the box of who they want to be. Another one of my patients who's also trans, she shared her story of being a sex worker. So she had originally worked in a spa, had been doing well. Then she started to transition. So she had worked at the front desk. They started moving her back. They moved her upstairs. Then they moved her out and fired her. So she didn't have a choice, and she had to work. So she began sex work. She developed HIV, all of these different things. So we were talking, giving her treatment, all of this kind of things, giving her little Netflix and chill boxes with condoms and stuff, which her other doctors wouldn't do because they're sitting there judging her. Yeah. And I've been seeing her for a few years. So about 2 years in, I'm like, you check in. You're like, okay, what you doing? You still staying safe? All of those kinds of things. And she's like, Dr. D, you'd be so proud of me because now I'm doing video sex work solo. And like, we had a little dance in the room. I was like, yay, you're staying safer. But like, imagine if people came into your office, which people will for the listeners out there, and they felt like you were judging them and saying, oh, why are you doing that? That's not your business. That's their job. So that's my soapbox.
Love me that soapbox, because it's so important to have folks in the healthcare industry having your perspective. And I mean, I think even something that came to me is even folks who are fat, like there's so many folks that refuse to go to the doctor and like who their lives are at risk because they literally feel so judged and so morally projected upon, which again, right, like BMI, who was not researched on, and there's just so many different identities. And so I think, I mean, we look at, for example, sex workers as a population, which are extremely marginalized, extremely oppressed. And then you have all the different intersections within that identity. But it's always the case when you make a space safe for the most marginalized, everyone else will benefit. Everyone else will benefit. So if you're not, if you're coming into a healthcare practice and you're practicing sex worker, for example, if it's a safe space for you, it's probably also going to be a safe space for a fat person, for a trans person, for a queer person, for a disabled person, like the list, for a woman, like the list goes on. And so I think it's really just about like recognizing there are so many people, and probably so many of our listeners also have at least one part of our identities that we may have feel judged by, or may have feel marginalized in society by. And like, we all deserve to be able to bring our whole selves with our whole bodies to our doctors and to our healthcare spaces. And it's not like, in some ways, I don't think it's the doctor's fault, right? It's just like society and the systems we grew up in and like the lack of resources and education. But I think once you are aware of it and realize it, then it is your responsibility to sort of do what you can to gain those resources and education and work on yourself to be able to be a safe space for folks that are coming to you for treatment.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought that up. Like, hopefully, many people aren't intentionally being biased, but it happens. So that's why cultural competency is so important. I like to think that I'm pretty culturally competent, but I don't know everything. Like, I have to learn as well. Like, I know my culture. I know people that I'm engaged with. I ask questions, but no one's perfect. So it's okay to ask questions instead of making mistakes. I know when I first started working at the clinic that I mentioned, I had no experience in trans care. So if you're building that rapport and you're talking with the patients and asking them questions in a respectable manner, they'll share everything. So I'm like, okay, how'd that happen? Why do you feel that way? How did it make you feel? What experiences have you had with other doctors that you didn't like? Like, these are things that you can, one, learn things about, and also grow and have those experiences, because I would hate for you to sit in those boxes and have people feel uncomfortable talking to you. I know that we've had a lot of guests recently on the past episodes talking about admissions and how to get in, and I know that's a lot of things that you guys are thinking about at this stage. But one of the big things that they talk about is your essays and your interviews and telling your why. Now that you're doing it, remember that why and think back on it, because your why hopefully isn't like, I want to treat cis white men, or I only want to treat people who have my exact beliefs or just like me. Like, think about your why and why you want to help people, all that little story you wrote down in your personal statement when you're seeing those patients.
Yes. And I think there's something so maybe important to highlight, where I think in going through, the admissions process and even right in practice, where you have to appear so confident and like everything, right? Because you're trying to not necessarily prove to yourself, but you're trying to gain trust from, the admissions director, or gain trust from, the patients you're practicing on, whatever that may be. And I think in like the real life setting, it's so important to sort of check the ego at the door and be humble and recognize every single individual, whether you've seen a body like theirs or not, is different and has their own unique set of experiences. And like you said, Erkeda, like the best thing that you can do is just ask and be curious and admit and say like, hey, if I'm, I don't know, if I'm using your pronouns incorrectly, like, please tell me. If I'm, doing something that isn't feeling good, like, let me know how this is feeling as I'm touching you, whatever it might be. And just make sure you open the space for feedback and give the patient some of that agency and power back. And I think that's like the easiest way to build trust and not put the onus of sort of doing everything perfect on you, because you're also a human, just like the person in front of you. And you're also learning, and you've never, this is a whole unique individual in front of you, and every individual is going to be individual. And so it's just ask questions, be humble, and like, don't assume that you know everything about them, because of course you don't. You know what you do know, and that's what they came there to you for.
I couldn't agree more. And even making the assumptions with people that you think are very similar to you.
Yeah.
Like, don't make the assumption for that as well. You have to meet people where they are and ask questions, because people can make assumptions when you're seeing a lawyer that, okay, they went through law school, they're pretty smart, all of these things, I'm going to use these big words. You have to meet people where they are. They may not be health literate. You may see another doctor. I know sometimes when I go to certain doctors or I go with my family members, like, I'm a primary care doctor, I know a little bit about everything, but not everything about one thing. So if I'm going to an oncologist, I don't know what those medications are. Like, explain it to me and don't make assumptions that I know just because you see that on the list or something like that. Like, talk to people. My next question kind of talks about what you're doing in the tech industry. So tech's all the rage. We've all been hearing about health technology. You're a leader in sex tech. Can you tell us what sex tech is?
It's really, it's kind of like a funny, not euphemism, but I think it's really a way, like, using technology and the digital space and all the different, sort of like new resources that exist to talk, educate, and utilize in like sexual wellness. And here I would say the primary I don't know, focus, but like sort of it's foundationally meant to highlight and look into the different ways that people, again, that aren't cis men, experience pleasure and can experience their relationship to their sexuality. Because again, for so long, it's, the entire sex industry has 100% been focused on cis men. And so when we talk about sex tech, it's everything from, let's say, camming to vibrators that, have plugins to AI robots to audio, erotic audio stories, to finding different tools like Planned Parenthood came out with. I forgot what it's called. Oh, Rue. They're like chatbot that, anonymously can answer, like teenagers' questions about their bodies and about reproductive health and like all of that. So it's really like a widespread in terms of like the actual use cases, I guess, but really it feels like the philosophy behind it is really to further the expansion of what we look at and consider even as sex, and seeing pleasure as something that's part of our wellness and the ways that our bodies experience and react to these different stimuli. So I have been writing, interviewing, sort of been like brand face of lots of different projects in the last few years, really again with the goal of just destigmatizing pleasure, destigmatizing, vagina owner bodies, and bringing more education and representation to our bodies and to our experiences in these spaces.
I love that. It seems so expansive and so innovative. Like, of course, we have health tech, and this falls under that because it's wellness. But where you're talking about utilizing technology to communicate with patients, like telehealth, you have wearable devices like Fitbits and Apple Watches and so many other different things. And you're just figuring out how to bring this area to the next frontier, because we're living in a digital age and we have to digitize everything.
Yeah, and I think it sort of speaks to, again, like the stigmatization of bodies and experiences that society has sort of placed, in finding a way of like, hey, our bodies can experience some things that feel really good. And also a lot of times, like for me, I've had so much sexual trauma that a lot of times those things don't feel really good. And so what do I do about that? And I have found that more actually in the healthcare space, which was like the space I first went to when I was having lots of pain, they were like, sorry, there's no research. Sorry, we don't know what this is. And it's been in the sex tech space that there's been a lot more, at least just like education in the folks there, research into different products that might help. And, at least if not a final solution, steps to get there, and like space to talk about it, which I feel like is the first thing, because for so long I thought it was an individual issue that I had. I thought that I was broken, something was wrong with me, until I realized, no, there's so many people who have the same experience as I do. We just like don't know where to go. And so at least in the sex tech space, I have found, okay, there's an effort and a push and an impetus to, because we are prioritizing bodies that aren't just men, to look into it and see what can be done.
I love that. I know we're about to come to a close, but I just want to mention to the students one thing that you mentioned, where you would mention something and they say, oh, there's nothing we can do about that. Number one, that takes a lot of courage to mention it, because I know that a lot of doctors don't ask. One of the things that we need to work on as physicians is not only going through those checklists like we talked about, where we are saying like, okay, we're asking if they're sexually active. Okay, how long has it been? Or when did you first start your period? And all of those basic questions, to moving further, to instead of just saying that, ask them how's their experience? Are they feeling okay? Are they feeling safe?
Yes.
Have they been traumatized? And all of these things that people don't just bring up in common conversation. They're going to say yes or no. So you kind of have to build that relationship so you can talk more about it, so you can help them. Like, you may not know what to do, but you can send them to certain specialists, physical therapists. There are a lot of health tech companies that are coming out focused on women, not only in sexual health, but menopause care and a lot of things that we don't have a lot of research on. So asking these questions can actually help your patients more.
This is giving me so much hope, because I'm like, oh, yes, I wish someone would have asked me these things. And I feel like it's so exciting to see this new generation of physicians getting to hear your voice and getting to sort of receive this information and carry everything we're talking about here into their experience. And really create some like actual healing in the world. That's so exciting.
Oh, thank you. So my last question, I love asking all my guests because we get so many different answers, is that our healthcare system is so perfect. So if you had a magic wand and you can change anything about the healthcare system, what would that be?
I think everything we've just spoken about. I think moving the healthcare system beyond just the obligation to the specific problem that's happening in the body, to really no longer objectifying, I think, the bodies that are in front of them and in front of the healthcare system at large. And, same goes for pharmaceutical companies, like all of that being wrapped in and seeing each individual and each community as a whole entity with a myriad of experiences and identities and relationships to all those different things. And I think if the healthcare system could get to a place where we no longer feel objectified, we feel like whole people, then I think so many more people and so many communities and so many folks with different identities that, like we spoke about here already, like literally would rather die or get sick or have something terrible happen in physical suffering than go to a doctor, wouldn't happen anymore because they would feel safe to come. And I think that's my dream. And thank you for allowing even that vision to come to life. And I think even in, this last 30-minute conversation, I'm like, oh, it's so possible. We're getting closer.
We are. So I really appreciate you coming and sharing your words of wisdom with our listeners. I just want to give you an opportunity to tell everyone goodbye, how they can reach out to you, and then mention those upcoming projects again, because you have some campaigns in the book.
Yes. So Arielle, Arielle is bad is my Instagram. Arielle Egozi is LinkedIn. And then arielleegozi.com is my website where, like my email's there and who to contact and all that stuff if you have any questions. And then 2024 Being Bad by Chronicle Books is coming out, where lots of these sort of little ideas and anecdotes will come through. And it's really a focus on seeing how we can step away from what society has deemed good and normal and right to finding what actually works for each of us, which I feel like is exactly what this has been a very bad conversation in the last 30 minutes. And I just feel very grateful to have been invited and, for everyone listening to allow my voice into your little, speakers or ears or, whatever you're listening to. And again, it really gives me hope. So I'm really grateful for this experience.
Well, thank you for those kind words and for sharing all your words of wisdom. You're always welcome back. Maybe you'll come back before the book comes out.
Yes.
And for all of the listeners out there, if you want to hear more conversations like this, send us a message on Instagram at @medschoolcoach or my personal one, Dr. DOCTOR, the letter D, Graham, GRAM, Dr. D Graham, and let us know what you want to hear about or who you want to see. See you again next week with another fantastic guest. Bye.
Each episode of the Prospective Doctor podcast is brought to you by Med School Coach. To access articles, videos, webinars, and free tools to help you succeed on your journey toward med school and beyond, visit our website, prospectivedoctor.com. We hope you tune in again next time.